Good morning.
Good morning.
Helen.
How is everyone?
Good morning, Helen. How are you?
I'm well. I hope you are.
All right, it's Angela Holmes.
Yeah.
Tell me this. If you have a not an emergency. I couldn't find a number the other night. Um, I had a client that was on oxygen, but her utilities had been turned off,
Mm-hmm.
and I was worried about her. So, what
Right.
number should be called? I was hoping they would send the heart team out.
Yeah.
Excuse
There
me.
is a number. Let me look up something real quick. I mean, you can call 911, but there is a non-emergency number. It's 560-4600.
4600. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Is there a number that I can just reach out to the heart team, or that's just a number?
They
It's
get dispatched to
not
you. They get dispatched
non-emergency.
to 911.
Oh, the heart team does. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
All righty.
Good morning, Colin.
Hey, how you doing, Nicole?
I'm doing
Hey,
good.
Nicole.
Good, yeah. Mm.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, how you doing, Jason?
Good.
right. We've got enough folks to call our meeting to order. I know Sharita might not be able to make it today. If we don't get a quorum, we can at least start the meeting. We just can't vote on anything. So we'll think that through. Or we can email out for a vote. Well, I guess we can't even really make it. We can't even make a recommendation to vote on sending out a vote to vote on anything. All right, let me pull up a couple things and see what we can do. All right. Put the agenda in the chat for anybody who is curious. So we can't do minutes, which is fine. We'll punt that to September. And I know we're behind on getting our April and May minutes completed. And that is just due to all the RFPs and scoring we've had to do and trying to get the state ESG application and HUD COC application up and running. It's taken a lot of capacity to do that. But we will have those ready for the September meeting. Unsheltered numbers, I did get those from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. This month we are at 45 self-reported unsheltered families, which, if I remember correctly, is up from last year, or not last year, our May meeting.
Well, it was 47, but we placed 2 families last week at Family Moving Forward.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that is great. What I will say, to me, what's more up is the at risk. I mean, there's 39 families at risk within 14 days of being evicted.
And on those 14 families that are at risk, Nicole, are those folks who are we able to confirm that those are folks who the sheriff is coming to lock the units up?
They're all about to have court dates.
Okay.
So I know this week and next week, there's a lot of court dates and they've been dealing with legal aid. So they're in that process.
Okay. So some of these 14 days are people who are within 14 days of a court date.
It's 14 days of stating with the eviction saying they have to be out on this day.
Got it.
But there's no sheriff papers yet. But they do have a date stating that they have to be out of the property.
Okay.
And they're just trying to appeal it and go to court with legal aid. So I'm waiting to hear follow-ups.
Okay. Yeah, that's a big number.
Can I ask a question? Is legal aid, do they still have funding for the eviction prevention program? Do you know? Because I heard that their funding was running out.
I do know the funding is running low. I know we don't have any more eviction funding.
Well, we never had eviction money. We had homelessness prevention money.
Well, we did.
Which is very different.
Yeah, I do know they still have some, is what I was told last week, but I know it is dwindling. And so is DSS. They're dwindling too on their funding.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
In the, yeah, so I don't know the answer to whether or not they've got any eviction dollars to prevent eviction in there, but we'll go from there. We did want to have, we're not going to be able to necessarily vote on this, but we can have a discussion about white flag planning. So that's why I invited Drew Wotton from Open Table, because they've got money in a contract that we will extend, that we're in the process of extending, that will carry white flag through December 31st. And the plan is to let Open Table continue using the money that's already in their contract that didn't get spent last cold weather season to take us through December 31st. We at the city are in the process of figuring out how to continue white flag with a contract starting January 1st, 2024, that will run for the remainder of the white flag season and possibly into the next white flag season as well. With that, Drew, I will turn it over to you if you'd like to kind of talk to folks about what your thoughts are on changes and moving forward, how you're thinking of operating white flag and what might be different this year.
Great. Thanks, Colin.
Mhm.
So good morning, everyone. I know most folks on here, but just as a reminder, my name is Drew Wotton. I serve as the Executive Director of Open Table Ministry. Like Colin said, just wanted to provide some updates for what we are thinking through for our emergency winter shelter, which will kick off November 1st through the end of December, as we do have the spending limit that we want to make sure we're supporting folks during the cold winter months of 2023. So technically this should just say till 2023, because I'll let Colin speak more about potential funding moving forward, but I'm just going to talk through what our plans are for the end of 2023. So we have approximately $50,000 to spend out. A significant of that will be on rooms. Just so you all know the full context, there's not a lot of feasible hotels that we have identified in Durham that are willing to work with us and meet the needs of our community. Last year, we operated a shelter from November 1st to March 31st at Hometown Studios. It was sufficient, but we did not have the best experience, and I don't think our clients had the best experience at that hotel. We've sent out, following our procurement process, a number of emails and solicitations to different hotels for this year, and we've identified extended stay on Ivy Creek, which is back right next to Harris Teeter, as our location for our site for this year. So starting November 1st, we're going to stand up 10 hotel rooms, and folks will be there on a week-to-week basis, and I'm happy to send this out afterwards, but hopefully folks are exiting to positive destinations, but there's going to be intensive case management from OTM's support on OTM's side during that stay. Would love input from either this body or from the HSAC in general about how we'd like to split the division of rooms between families with children or singles, and thinking through that. We do have a referral policy that will open up towards the end of October, and I'm happy to send out specific dates, knowing that we are going to be standing up the emergency winter shelter beginning on November 1st. So we don't anticipate a lot of openings after that date. Again, a lot of this has to do with the quality of hotel rooms that we are able to access in Durham that meet basic living conditions and are also able to provide kitchenettes, standard maintenance cleaning schedules, and partnering on a monthly basis with extended stay at Ivy Creek is really the most feasible option that we have found. So if we're able to receive funding, we will continue this through March 31st. There's different information on this kind of one pager. Again, I'm happy to send it out afterwards about just our procedures in general. Like I said, there's going to be 10 rooms with intensive case management. And then Colin, I'm happy to answer any questions or also start thinking through what sustainability looks like and how we're thinking through future white flag projects that OTM could use future funding to kind of facilitate outside of a hotel setting. Yeah, just realizing that we're kind of juggling a lot of moving pieces with, historically we've done congregate and non-congregate. We've done we did just the hotel last year at Hometown Studios. So thinking about our community's needs and how we're able to utilize this funding from the city. This is our plan. I wanted to make sure that I'm speaking specifically to this project and to this one period. I'm happy to answer any questions or elaborate more, clarify anything about this plan before potentially, I know we discussed Colin talking about what future shelter plans could look like, because I know that's a piece of the conversation as well.
Thoughts, comments, ideas on this in terms of how we utilize rooms? I think you said 10 rooms, Drew.
Correct.
And what we're hoping to get a little bit of is kind of some input on if we have 10 rooms for white flag with the case management, we know we're seeing an uptick of unsheltered families and singles. Is there any thoughts, suggestions on splitting the rooms 50-50 between families and singles, or all singles, all families, 60-40, 70-30? Just sort of looking for thoughts and some guidance on it. And we obviously don't have a quorum to make a decision on it, but we can definitely take some input and sort of work on crafting that to bring it back in September for final approval.
And just in terms of timeline as well, one other piece I wanted to make sure was making sure this is on the wider HSAC's kind of agenda, or at least on their radar by the September meeting, because towards the end of October is when we'll be sending out our referral list. And we want to make sure, one of the things we ran into last year as well. So anecdotally speaking, I don't have numbers in front of me. We saw a large number of families with children at our shelter last year. So if there are folks with the McKinney-Vento within the school system that want to make referrals and don't necessarily have access to the HMIS, making sure that folks are able to work with Nicole or someone at Entry Point to get access to those HMIS numbers, so that we can make sure that we're serving vulnerable families with children as well.
It's a good, Jeff asked me a question. Are you thinking, Drew, on doubling up singles in rooms?
I think it depends on depends on the vulnerability, to be frank. And depends on, I think it's something to think through. I can think of specific clients that are either so vulnerable that they should not be paired with someone. And then I could also think of situations where it would be beneficial, and thinking through stabilization and housing plans as we're going into, if they're going to be utilizing the shelter for the full time we're standing it up, that could be really tricky. If they have a plan in place and this is, bridging a gap, I could see us doubling it up. So I'm happy for any input that you all have, like what you think would be best practice. Like so many things I land with on a day-to-day basis, it depends. So I realize that's as murky as it gets.
So I just, man, these problems don't get any easier, do they? Just thinking about the families, and the increase, that we're seeing in mental health issues, behavioral health issues, and drug abuse. Even, we've seen a lot of drug abuse challenges. I think my thoughts would be, if you are going to have, some type of a split where there's family singles, how we are going to ensure that the kids, are going to be safe and protected. I know there's no magic formula for that, but just maybe thinking through that, how to do the rooms. is it a block of rooms within like, one hallway, or what do you?
So the plan was, so I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with the Ivy Creek location of extended stay. Just
I'm not.
speaking fairly transparently, I feel significantly better about this location than our like safety wise for both like our clients and our staff than Hometown Studios. Like we got through it and it was a step up from being in a car. Like I realize I'm speaking somewhat not much. Hometown Studios at Ivy Creek, I think is in itself a step in the right direction when we think of safety. The hotel staff has made, I'm currently in the process of setting up our direct billing and, ironing out some of these situations. Tammy, my thought is, so I can get from the hotel's perspective is they don't want our block to be disruptive in any way to some of their longer term guests, which I can totally understand. And I've seen this with other agencies as well. My preference is that we split up folks so that we're not clustered together. I also think logistically it's going to be tricky as well. This location does not have elevators, so all of our rooms we're requesting to be on the front on the first level and as many ADA rooms as possible. So I think logistically, just stating our preferences, and we're also asking for as many double rooms as possible because we can work more with doubles. I think if we're asking that, my hope is that we're going to get spread out a little bit more. I know without going there, it's hard to describe. I think the location is tucked away, which again isn't always a great thing, but for me, it's a much quieter direction. It's a much safer, and I'm speaking entirely anecdotally, just my own opinion. It seems like a safer location. So we'll certainly keep that in mind as well, and I appreciate that, Tim.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, Drew, I want to make sure we're clear on this, is the first, there's 10 rooms. The first 10 coming in, maybe the 10 who are in there for the whole cold weather, the whole winter shelter season. Is that correct?
There is a possibility of that, yes. So there's going to be the requirement that folks are meeting with us at least weekly. So we're going to, and this is a balance too, right? Like we don't want to come in and tell our families and tell the clients that we're serving, hey, you're here until March 31st. Our plan is to run the shelter until then, but folks need to be checking with us regularly. And we're going to be, doing inspections because this is a hotel that we're partnering with. Like we want to make sure that they're keeping the space neat and tidy, that we're avoiding bugs, the best that we can. But there is that possibility, Colin. The only way is if folks were exited, but hopefully going to positive destinations. I even know, again, I don't have numbers from last year, but Tammy, I think we had a number of families that were exiting our shelter and going to families moving forward. It seemed like a big number to me. I just we don't work with a ton of families, but it seemed like we were last winter, and it seemed like a lot were moving to families moving forward. So yes, Colin, that could be the case. I'm not anticipating a lot of transitions and then like a lot of opportunities for referrals and prioritizations after that first one.
And it also sounds like one of the differences this year is increased case management capacity, whereas last year it was very short term, more, checking people in, checking people out. But because you may have 10 people for the same 10 people for a month or a month and a half straight, the case management would be focused on, okay, you can't stay here forever. If a shelter bed becomes available, the expectation is you're going to exit the hotel and go to the shelter, or use that exit to shelter as a motivator to sort of work on permanent housing options, utilize rapid rehousing or ability to self-resolve.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we're doing check-ins and check-outs quite a bit. I mean, I feel like last winter was relatively mild, but I mean, yeah, if we're standing up rooms on a Thursday or Friday and checking out on Monday or Tuesday, it was difficult for us to do any type of intensive case management during that brief stay. As soon as we would connect with people about identity documents or connection to other mainstream resources, folks were usually leaving the shelter. Do we want to talk, Colin, about 2024 and about that, or are there other questions? I
think if we're talking about like November 2024 or January 1st, 2024.
Well, I think though, isn't that a part of a bigger conversation, right?
Well, yeah, January 1st, 2024, depending on how this goes, would follow whatever policy and procedure we adopt at the beginning of this cold weather season. So, if it's 10 rooms, if there's more money available in January, that 10 rooms could go up. Right now, the reason we're at 10 rooms through December 31st is because that's basically what the budget that's available would allow. And then we could potentially increase that number of rooms depending on budget starting in January. So what do we do for basically November through December will be what we will continue to do following the same policy procedure for January through the end of March 2024. The next piece, and this will be a bigger conversation probably once we get into running white flag, but talking about as it's difficult to find hotels that are willing to work with us, we've also learned over multiple hotels that there are a lot of expenses that go to hotels. It's not just the paying for the rent, paying the room rental for the hotels. It's also paying for damages that are above and beyond normal wear and tear that unfortunately our homeless population has caused significant damages to a number of hotels or motels that have had to be paid for by somebody. And it's seeing the pictures, it's not, normal, oops, I spilled some grape juice on the carpet type thing. It's carving in desks or, breaking or ripping up a painting or a art on the wall. So there's been some serious damages that have happened and talking. So what we'd be talking about is, do we want to continue using motels for white flag, which also creates a problem in the coordinated entry system, because when urban ministries or families moving forward have an opening during cold weather season, people are like, oh, it's not a motel. No, I'm not interested. So we end up with people either hoping self-resolving, or people are choosing to remain unsheltered because they can't go to a hotel room because that's not what's available at the time, and getting angry, which unfortunately I think Nicole Lamb and the coordinated entry staff get the brunt of that anger, and looking at how do we create a little bit more space, how do we maybe make this more cost effective, and talking about this, for planning for the 2024-2025 cold weather season, looking at going back to a congregate shelter for white flag, where we sort of rotate people through churches or otherwise, and maybe one church hosts white flag for a week, and then in their fellowship hall, and we bring in mats, and we have security staff overnight that are there to help and handle issues, partner with the churches, that the churches could prepare meals and serve dinner, and then get cleaned up, move everybody out, and do it for this week. And church B does it for the second week, church C does it for the third week, and sort of rotate around, and it sort of creates a little more equity and maybe resolve some of that. Well, I'm not going to shelter because it's not a hotel. Well, either you're rotating in basement fellowship hall, church fellowship halls, or a shelter. That's something that we need to talk about at a future meeting.
And I don't know how many on here realize that's how Families Moving Forward started, with the family rotations through the church. It was Interfaith Hospitality Network, And so that's exactly how family is moving forward, you know, when they merge with Genesis Home started, and it worked. You know, it's not ideal, has issues, but it works.
So just to think through some of the logistics. So I think if I'm understanding you correctly, Colin, any additional funding that the city would make available, obviously open to anyone, would run for all of 2024, right? So through 2 white flag seasons. So it's something that theoretically we need to be thinking through now, right? About what to do in 24, 25 with this congregate shelter.
I think it depends on a couple of things. So I don't know that we necessarily have to solve like the November 2024 to March 31st, 2025 right now before we get January 1st money in place. I just need to have a couple conversations to make sure that we are able to move the process forward. And if we have to do an RFP, then people could respond, hey, here's how we do it. And if if we talk to folks and nobody's interested in applying for the funds, then it's a waiver then it might be a waiver of competition, at which point the contract would be written in partnership and could include flexibility in the language of, you know, providing this or this as determined by the, you know, the contract holder, and, you know, try and come up with some numbers of how to do that.
So these would be my questions, just thinking through that. Kind of my planning side of the brain is, I think utilizing volunteers and community partners is something that OTM would be very happy and interested in. Tammy, that was my entry. I interned with a interfaith hospitality network in South Carolina in 2011. It's my first entry into the homeless services field. So that, I know it's not ideal, but it is kind of a soft spot in my heart. Is, would each kind of congregate site, would it be serving individuals or families, going back to that? Because I feel like it'd be really tricky to have both at the same site. So that would be something that we would want to think through logistically. Kind of a liability perspective with making sure each place has insurance coverage, and if the fire marshal would need to, you know, do inspections and things like that for each site. Obviously, if we're thinking 4 but if it's either individuals or family, and if we wanted to do both, then we need to have 8. That just seems like a lot. And Colin, you mentioned having security and staff overnight. When we ran
security, like not hiring a private security guard necessarily.
Correct, right. But when we ran our congregate shelter here at Trinity for 2 winters, like that cost is significant. So would it be like, could volunteers do 75% of it and OTM provides 1 staff overnight? Like, we just need to play through that, because that really balloons our cost significantly, is staffing. And, you know, finding folks who are willing to do 3rd shift seasonal work is hard. And then would we want to do, would we call it just on white flag, or like when we did the congregate shelter at Trinity, we stood it up for 90 days regardless of temperature? And if we're not doing a hotel, it seems like we would need to have options for both families and individuals from November 1st to March 31st. So that's a 5-month period. So just thinking through when we would want to call congregate shelters. And another piece I'll just add to this is we've started looking into it a little bit, and I know some colleagues in Wake County that do something similar. So it might be worth doing a site visit or just setting up a Zoom call with our colleagues in Wake County, because I know they have multiple sites that open in churches and other places during the white flag period.
I'm struggling a little bit too with theirs because they lost beds at the main shelter at the South Wilmington Street Center. I live in Raleigh. So they kind of had a little difficulty rotating that around. But the family promise model, which is kind of what you're discussing, would be a place like at Open Table, but they tap the faith-based community to do kind of similar to what Colin said, where churches would volunteer volunteers to be there overnight, but it wouldn't be on a set group of volunteers. Each church had a particular time when they were expected to be there for that week. And it wasn't always the same person each night. There was a training class for all volunteers so that they understood how to de-escalate and what to do if there were any incidents. But then maybe a church would have their 7 nights, but it may be 10 different people working on the 7 nights. So it's something to consider looking at moving forward.
Yeah, and I think logistically, Drew, it would be easy to ask the churches to choose if they want to do families or, individuals. And I know that we've got a lot of resources that could certainly help you with the training, because this is kind of our history, and then possibly even help with any of the case management that could come out of that. So we're willing to do whatever we can to support the efforts. One of the things that was kind of a unexpected opportunity was that some of the faith institutions were able to donate funds, and it led also to identified potential rapid rehousing places, because of the congregation having places that they knew of that we didn't know of. So there's a lot of opportunities to leverage resources, I think. So it might work.
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously a ton to think through, which I'm glad we're starting to just put the bug in people's ears now for winter 24-25. Yeah. Another piece, so that's our history too, is working with communities of faith, something I'm excited about. And I think is a really just sweet spot for Open Table moving forward. And then another piece, just to add another wrinkle to it, is especially with individuals who might not have access to transportation, is geographically Durham is so spread out. Utilizing church vans and transportation, making sure we're very clear, because I think the big piece that Colin did bring up, which we've noticed too, is there are folks who, when we did the congregate shelter here at Trinity, no matter the temperature, they slept here 90 nights in a row. And truly finding those folks who would utilize shelter if it's available. I think the congregate shelter, and I think churches are more than willing to have opportunities to serve if we kind of give them that week by week opportunity. But what does that look like geographically? Just because it's we're in the heart of downtown, this makes sense. But say we're going over to South Point, that's a haul. Just thinking about transportation and logistics from that perspective as well. Even thinking all the way up to North Durham, which is where I live. It was a 30-minute drive to South Point last night. It's spread out. So just thinking through all these things, I appreciate everyone's help, and would love to chat more as well.
So let's put our planning for 24-25 on hold. I think that's going to be a big conversation, and we'll need more time than we have in this meeting. Are there thoughts on the current plan of how to use 10 rooms, and we can sort of scale it up if more money were to be available for this cold weather season? Is there, I do see, I think Colleen asked if hotels for families only, and since we only have hotels this option or this year, I think we're gonna have to figure out a way to sort of split families and singles. Or does the committee kind of want to say, all right, families only are going to hotels, and singles, there isn't a white flag option for singles? I think that creates a little bit of a risk, given we've got some pretty fragile single adults out there, and we obviously have single families, and we don't have the funds currently available to do a winter shelter for everyone, nor do we have a hotel large enough willing to take 100 households. I mean, that would pretty much max out a hotel and probably run several $100,000.
And maybe that question
A
to
month.
Colleen is for the next, if we were doing a congregate shelter, if we would do a hotel for families, that gets really complicated. We did that for 2 years. My preference would be no, that we should do a congregate for both, but obviously I'm welcome to input. I just think if we could do, it just gets so hard doing for our staff trying to logistically be at 2 places for check-ins on white flag nights and standing up 2 different programs. Because there's policies and procedures for the congregate shelter and then for the non-congregate. Yeah, if there was a need, we would do it, because we've done it in the past, but yeah, I think preferred, at least my preference would be that we'd have, we could do 2 sites.
The other thing we can do, and Heidi's, Commissioner Carter just asked about using urban ministries, and we could also talk to urban ministries and families moving forward about on really cold nights, on white flag nights, being able to, bring a few families in as overflow. Historically, we've done it the last 2 years, and Tammy will probably support me that we have, and Nicole Lamb will probably also share that we have sent at least 3 people over to the 3 slots for families at Families Moving Forward last year when it was bitterly cold, and 1 person showed up out of probably 12 families, and they, just don't want that option. If it's not a hotel, they don't want to, folks have basically voted with their feet or their cars or however they get to where they're going. If it's not the motel, I don't want to stay, on a mattress or a cot or something else, unless it's something. So we can definitely put that and make it an, well, I can't speak for Families Moving Forward or Urban Ministries, but I can reach out to both of them to sort of get their thoughts on ability to have some overflow space only.
And I think
those nights that are really bitterly cold.
And I think if we went the church's route too, like when we hosted the congregate shelter here at Trinity, on paper, I think we had 20 beds, and I think on average we had 33 people here a night. We can't throw volunteers into that position. Like, we would have to be very clear, like, we have 25 beds available. When it is those white flag nights, and there's bitter cold, we can't be asking, when it's our staff, we fill every space in the fellowship hall, but when it's volunteers, we can't be putting people into that situation. So we would need much more kind of clear plans around that.
We're willing to do the same thing that we did last year, have the offer, to have overflow at Families Moving Forward. We're here to help do whatever we can.
Thank you, Tammy. I'll reach out to Sheldon. He's
He should be back this
Comes back
should
today,
be.
I think.
Okay, so I'll reach out and see if he's willing to do that again this year, which will give us a little bit more bandwidth. And like I said, I think I identified a funding source, and I just need to talk with Reginald and make sure we've got a plan to move forward. So I'm not hearing anything about how to divide up the 10 rooms, if we want to split it 50-50 singles and families or anything else. Part of me kind of, feels like a 50-50 split sort of would make sense. Given right now our single or 60-40, looking at our unsheltered numbers today, we got 66 singles and 45 families. That's essentially a 60-40 split. So 6 rooms for singles and 4 rooms for families. Thoughts on sort of.
But if we're talking about singles, we're looking mainly at medically vulnerable 65 plus, right? So of
Right.
those 60% right now, how many of those would meet that particular criteria?
Right now, there's 15 that are medically vulnerable.
Yes,
Single.
I'm more inclined to go with either a 50-50 or a 60-40 the other way,
Okay.
families with 40% individuals. There's seem to be more options for singles for individuals than there are for families. This is my perception. I may be wrong.
Yeah, my thing is, I think a 50-50 would be acceptable. The biggest, concern I have is how they're divided, to make sure, that preferably it would be that the singles would be on one level and the families on another level. That'd be, I think, a preference for safety reasons.
All right, so I don't know if we don't quite have a quorum. Why don't we do some more digging on this and kind of play with it and come back in September with kind of a recommendation based on the data. I think you raise a good point there, Helen. If we come back in September with kind of where our data is and see if we can pull some historic data and look at what the historic makeup has been on the 62 plus and chronic conditions versus families and make that recommendation. Because the other piece is if we do doubling up of rooms, if you, I think on that 60-40 split, Helen, you might end up serving, 8 people instead of 4 singles if we can double them up. And even if it's not 8, we might get 6 in the 4 rooms and figure that out.
Well, I'm happy to send out this one pager. I also have copies of our policies and procedures, if that's helpful. On a very personal note, my wife and I are expecting a child any day now, so I will not be here in September. I'll be on parental leave, but Colin, whoever passed me along what the committee recommends. And that's part of our reason getting everything set up is because I'll be back in mid-October and we're going to be setting up the shelter right around then. So yeah, I'm happy to send this out immediately following the meeting and welcome any feedback.
All right, let's move on. Anthony had to step away, so we can, if you'll allow me to digress from our planned agenda, we can shift to the coordinated entry evaluation. And as you may recall, the HUD ESG application requires us to do an assessment on coordinated entry. So this is our annual look at coordinated entry, and we've kind of simplified this and streamlined it to look at some data and trends on coordinated entry, the front door, as well as our exits to rapid rehousing and PSH. So I can walk you through that, which will be, and just sort of go through it quickly. If you have things that you have questions on, we can answer them. And if not, we can go through that pretty quickly. And then when Anthony comes back, we can walk through the work group. All right. So if you all can see my screen here, down. We did go back, we double checked numbers from the year ending June 30th, 2022. And this is for the year ending June 30th, 2023, looking at our data. And as you all know, when we run these reports, they are accurate as of the date you run the report. There are times when people go back and there's data cleanup. And when we did the report last year, it was before the HUD required longitudinal system analysis and the system performance measures were due to HUD. So we did this work. And when I went back, there are numbers that changed from last year as part of that data cleanup for the final report to HUD. So these numbers are reflective of, so if you look at last year's report and look, hey, these numbers from 2022 don't match, they're not going to match because we went back and looked at the numbers, and after the data cleanup, we have adjustments that have been made. So we did see a drop in the number of persons who called coordinated entry, went from 3,405 to 3,382. Not a huge drop, just a small one. And we did see a small drop in adults over the age of 18 looking for help, but a pretty significant increase in children who were part of households looking for help from coordinated entry, which is no surprise to any of us on this call who've been watching the numbers of families experiencing homelessness increase. Persons with unknown age, this is really a kudos to the front door providers, the coordinated entry team, and being able to collect more data and better data from folks and having people feel comfortable sharing their ages of children. We also had fewer people remaining in the system, so that means we had more people exiting. We did see an increase of 35 people exiting the homeless system and exiting coordinated entry this year, which is a good thing. And we'll talk about those exit destinations later, and there's some good news on that front as well. The number of adult head of households, this is our proxy, for lack of a better term, of how many households did we serve? Because one head of household, you'll notice that we served 3,382 people. That's all people. That translates down to 2,000 households. That's how those two numbers intersect. We also had a decrease in veterans seeking services, but we did see an increase in people who identified as chronically homeless, went from 274 to 286. These are data quality, and we are still working to get our data quality down. These are error rates, meaning we didn't collect the data. So personally identifiable information, client location, their disabling conditions, and destinations. And there's two areas, disabling condition and destinations, where people are exiting to, are the two that increased. And some of that is when participants exit, they sometimes just disappear and they never call us or tell us where they're going. And that's a piece that is a struggle in all homeless service providers, of knowing where folks go when they leave if they don't tell you. And we're not at the luxury of being able to make assumptions. One of the things that was interesting that we found as we're looking at equity, we did notice that people who identified as white or as white, American Indian, or Asian experienced a decrease in seeking services, whereas people who identified as Black, African American, Hawaiian, or multiple races, we did see an uptick. So you'll notice that people who identified as white were 17.4% last year, and that dropped to 15.6%, whereas people who identified as Black or African American or African went from 74.9% to 76.8%. And it's about an extra 35 people coming in. So it's not a huge statistical jump, but it is something that is concerning when you see one group not reaching out as much. And you'll notice the same one, Asian or Asian American, really small adjustments downward. Whereas if you come down to our multiple races, 118 to 185, that's a pretty big jump percentage-wise on a year. And then we do have people who choose not to report on their race or ethnicity. We also continue to see a similar trend, statistically the same. Most people seeking assistance are not Hispanic or Latino, 94.3% versus 93%. So we did see a small drop in people who identified as Hispanic or Latin, Latino, Latinx. And in terms of data collections, refusing, we did see fewer people. It's 2%, or two people. It's not quite 0%, but rounding, it's such a small fraction, it shows up as 0%. So forgive that. And then data not collected went from 33 down to 9. Questions so far? Okay. We did notice people identifying as chronically homeless. This basically stayed the same. We did see a few people drop, but as an overall percentage, we're still at the same percentage number. We did see 12 fewer people identifying as chronically homeless. And we did see fewer non-chronically homeless in this category. That should be 0%. Then veterans, we did notice that total veterans did drop, and chronically homeless veterans dropped, and not chronically homeless veterans dropped as well. So those are all good measures on the veteran side. And this is total number of veterans. This is veteran number of households. So that's why these numbers are going to be a little bit different. Most of the bulk of our veterans are single adults. The total number of veteran households do include a few number of families where one or both parents are veterans. So that's why there's two categories here. And once again, we saw a drop in that group as well, looking for assistance. Domestic violence is concerning, as we saw a huge increase in the number of people who have a history of domestic violence, and a huge increase in the number of people who are fleeing domestic violence. So this is, really good information for us. If anybody's, applying for domestic violence bonus rapid rehousing grants, it's clear we have challenges with domestic violence in the region and need to have systems in place to sort of work with them. Exit destinations. So this is some really good news here, as we saw a 33% increase in people exiting coordinated entry and exiting the front door to permanent locations. So kudos to the front door providers on helping people self-actualize and exit. And we also saw a decrease in the number of people exiting to temporary destinations. So that's kind of a good thing. We want more people going to permanent housing than we want going to temporary. And institutional destinations include institutions, mental health, substance abuse treatment. So that decreased. And other destinations, that includes everything from unknown location to death, unfortunately. So it's it's kind of a catch-all that covers a large number of things. And we did see a big jump in people going to other destinations. Based on calls and emails that we're getting here, some of this number is probably due to people who are out of Durham calling and looking for assistance in Durham. And when they find out they're not going to be prioritized, we don't hear from them again. So they may just sort of end up staying in Asheville or Wilmington or, anywhere else. Now, when we look at permanent supportive, so what we've talked about so far is the front door and the entry of people experiencing homelessness. Now we're going to go to what we can consider the back door of the system, where folks are exiting the system into rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. As I talk about rapid rehousing first, we saw the total number of people served in rapid rehousing dropped this year. And some of that total number served dropping was due to the fact that people who entered rapid rehousing a year or a year and a half ago have been requiring really deep and long subsidies to be able to sustain and maintain their housing. And we're currently working on trying to figure out how to get them to be able to sustain their housing when the financial assistance ends. We did see an uptick in new rapid rehousing intakes. We did move that up 19.6%, which is 21 people, or 21 new people opposed to last year. So 128 new people entered rapid rehousing this year. And some of that is because we adjusted, as you'll recall, we adjusted our prioritization, which sort of made it a little bit easier for landlords to say yes, because landlords have been saying no to really, really high vulnerability, high risk households. And some of that new is because we took some of the first time homeless or some who may have not had as many high barriers which became a little bit more affordable. So rather than being tied up for 12 months or 18 months with rents, we've seen people being able to get in and maybe only need 1 to 6 months or 9 months of assistance, which is creating a little bit more turnover to allow more people into the rapid rehousing program. As we talk about permanent supportive housing, we did see the total served in permanent supportive housing drop, and 367 looks like a lot of people. In our data pools, the VASH vouchers are counted in our PSH pool. So some of these are homeless veterans that have been in the system for a long time and are chronically homeless, but are served through VASH. The PSH, new PSH, we only had 9 openings last year. And a lot of that is we don't really have a way to move people on from permanent supportive housing, as many of the people in the PSH programs are currently requiring longer and more intensive supportive services, as their mental health, substance abuse, or physical health needs are, pretty challenging, and they're unable to be able to get to the point where they can manage a lot of that on their own. And we also don't have, even for those who are able to manage their mental health, substance abuse, or disabling conditions on their own, we do not have enough housing choice vouchers to exit people to those housing choice vouchers for them to be able to sustain themselves. And it's a delicate balance of making sure that they've got the supports in place that they can sustain and the income to continue paying utilities and food and things like that once a housing choice voucher is issued to them, as there's no ongoing supportive services or financial assistance to assist with rent, electric or water or other bills. So that's kind of our overview of what's happened in the last year on coordinated entry and how we've moved folks through. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
I will say, in looking at the number of calls that you guys have received, we've been tracking the number of calls that we received this year as opposed to last year, the direct calls that we're getting from families that are seeking shelter. And we've seen a big increase in families that are calling us directly than we did last year. And the interesting thing about this is a lot of them are calling from out of town or out of state even. And so, we always refer them to Entry Point to make the calls. And then, I'm sure that once we tell them, because we kind of tell them too the priority, and they hear that, well, we're out of state, and I don't know if they make the decision not to call, but I just know that we're seeing an increase in calls to the shelters or to our shelter, even though you guys are seeing a little bit of a decrease.
Yeah, I agree, Tammy. There's more of an increase, but the thing what I'm learning is just seeing all the numbers. It's a more of an increase with families, but a lot of them are in Wake County. They're in Orange County. They're I get a lot of them from Wilmington. I get a lot from South Carolina.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're out of state and out of the county. And then when they learn that the prioritization, and then I give them coordinated entry numbers for all the other counties. So I try to, help them to guide them to the right place for shelter or for what they need.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing, Nicole. They're not in Durham. They're,
Yeah.
out of Durham. So interesting.
And I think it's because I know, talking to Wake County, their shelters have been full. So I think a lot of it is a lot of the county shelters are full and they're just trying to call any other county to get in.
Colin, thanks for this data. It's really interesting. The permanent supportive housing numbers what's the limiting factor there in serving more people? It's the numbers of new people in permanent supportive housing went down. Is that due more to lack of units that are available for permanent supportive housing, or is it due to less people needing it, or something else?
Well, we definitely have more people needing it.
That's what I thought.
The challenge is we only have so many permanent supportive housing units funded by VASH and by HUD's permanent supportive housing program. So when those units fill up, unless we're able to get people to do what HUD calls move on, i.e. with the intensive supportive services, they're able to be connected to community providers and able to manage their day-to-day ailments or day-to-day health issues, where we can convert them to a housing choice voucher because they need the ongoing rental subsidy. We just haven't been able to solve that piece of getting people to the point that they can care for themselves, and not just care for themselves on the health issues, but also have enough income to pay the bills that a housing choice voucher doesn't pay.
Okay,
And
got it. Yeah.
So
got
if
it.
we had more PSH units, we could absolutely fill them, but that's we're trying to get folks to apply for bonus projects. And if we score high enough on our continuum of care application, a bonus project could be awarded, which would give us a few more. HUD is also really pushing for closer and tighter integration with the health systems and trying to get health systems to contribute financially to paying for housing or paying for the supportive services, and using other funds to pay for housing to sort of expand that, for lack of a better term, PSH for folks.
Great. Do people here know about the Carver Creek property? And I know that was a good presentation on that a while back, but that is moving forward. Want to be sure people knew about that. The city and the county contributed about $3 million each of ARPA funding to work with work with who? Work
Housing
with
for New Hope.
Housing for New Hope. Yes, work with Housing for New Hope to convert that property that's now affordable housing for seniors into permanent supportive housing. So everybody's very excited about that, and just want to be sure that we sound the alarm, or the good alarm in this case, if that's happening.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Sally, I see your hands up.
Yes, I was just wondering whether you thought that the hold on issuing of emergency or housing choice vouchers has impacted at all the move on strategy for PSH.
Well, right now, that's a piece of what we're trying to do. Is we're currently in the process of trying to reconcile how many emergency housing vouchers we have remaining, as we've got folks out searching, and we have put a hold on issuing new PS or EHVs as DHA is short-staffed and trying to get, and Jason's here, he can sort of maybe fill in what he knows about this, as we're trying to get people caught up on vouchers that have been issued in the past, and trying to get things caught up. And we have put a pause on issuing EHVs. We have also haven't been in our coordinated entry meetings. We have talked about who is ready and able to no longer need the supportive services, and that's a big piece, is trying to figure out who no longer needs the supportive services and who has income to cover those pieces. So that's another piece for being able to help with those move-ons. Jason, do you want to say anything?
No, that represents my understanding too, Colin. That's the current status.
Yeah, we've been really working like Jeff. Now that we've got Jeff on board, he's been really trying to work and coordinate with DHA on trying to reconcile these lists. And I know Danita and I had sort of looked at how many EHVs that we have, and there were several EHVs that were given to people who ported in from other jurisdictions. And we're trying to keep an eye on that to find out if they don't lease up in the right amount of time, that we recapture those rather than renew them. If they're a Durham EHV, we typically have been renewing those and not recapturing them to allow people the opportunity to lease up. So this is part of our trying to recapture back, maybe 8 additional vouchers that mistakenly got given to folks who weren't supposed to have them from out of jurisdiction transfers following. And it's no fault of DHA. It's they followed the normal protocol with people who are porting, and it was just a oversight.
And these are people, and so these are people who were issued an EHV who were porting in.
Yes, they ported in with their EHV. Their EHV got absorbed into our EHVs, but there isn't a piece in place for the port in to be able to pay for that, which would free up our EHV. That's the piece that got dropped, and some of that happened I think it was just due to short staff on DHA's side and Blair leaving, Blair starting, Blair leaving, and it was just things didn't happen. And so we've been trying to figure out how to fix it. And it's not a clean and easy way. And I know DHA has reached out to HUD for technical assistance to see if there is a way to kind of reverse what's in place, but it's possibly more headache than it's worth. So we're trying to see what we can do. And I think only 1 or 2 have maybe actually leased up from out of jurisdiction. And we've kind of put a pause on those ports at this point. So we've at least put a stop to those ports, from my understanding. Is that your understanding, Jason? See you nodding.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. Yes, it is, Colin.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, that's helpful. And I think once that the EHV list is cleaned up and it's clear how many are left, I think it would be good to look at the housing choice voucher list and where we ended up. I know that was paused to move to EHVs, but looking at where we are on that, and do we have a tight system of knowing when people are continuing or those vouchers are relinquishing them.
On the regular HCVs?
Yep.
Yeah.
That were designated for the homeless.
Right. And my understanding, Jason, is currently DHA is not issuing HCVs. The only vouchers DHA is currently issuing are EHVs, and the HCVs that are being issued are for relocation due to redevelopment. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Right. Yeah. So I knew that there had been a pause on the HCVs, but at some point I assume that we'll revisit sort of how many of the promised ones were allocated and how many are still in use, and have an accounting for that system.
Yes. And that's a more complicated than the EHVs, as the HCVs that are, Jason, help me phrase it correctly. The HCVs that are allocated or available to the homeless system are a total of 225, but they're not a set aside like the EHVs are. They're kind of like, we have up to 225 if they're all available, and there's a whole lot of if statements. So it's not like there's 225 and we can start drawing against those. I don't know how to explain it.
That is correct. I really could have said it better. That's the tranche, and it's more complicated than regular HCV pool.
And the city is currently working with DHA on trying to work on our home ARP project. And that home ARP project would result in at least 24 new units for households exiting homelessness, and trying to work on incorporating some vouchers into that project as well. So that's the piece that we're trying to work on so that that RFP can go out. Granted, it's not going to help today. It's not going to help tomorrow. It's going to take some time to possibly build a new building, but it would result in at least 25 new units. And those 25 new units would be prioritized for people exiting homelessness. The other good news is we've got CASA is building Brian's Place up on Duke Street. And when that is completed, that'll be 16 units. I think they're all 1-bedrooms or efficiencies, and that'll be for singles, and all 16 of those, with the bulk of those 16 are prioritized for people exiting homelessness as well. So it'll be a place that should be easy for people with a PSH voucher or an HCV to lease up, and possibly rapid rehousing. So we're moving in that direction. Other thoughts, questions? I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about our next item with Anthony, but want to make sure that we cover any other questions on the data. And we'll send it all out to you all. So our next item, and thank you for allowing me to shift this, that Anthony could be here. For those, I don't think anybody here has met Anthony. So Anthony is our newest member of the homeless services team, and he has rounded out the homeless services team. We are now at our full capacity for allocated positions. Is it going to be enough to get everything done? We hope so, but time will tell, because the challenges continue to grow. So Anthony joins us. He came from the Miami COC and will be working a lot on partnerships and COC application, ESG applications. As Lloyd has shared, Lloyd's planning to retire sometime in the May timeframe of next year. So a lot of the things that Lloyd has been doing, Anthony will be assuming. And one of Anthony's first tasks is working with us on our continuum of care application. And this year's continuum of care application has specific points available to increase people with lived experience having input and being part of the continuum of care. So we're in the process, and we as a team have talked about setting up a work group to meet HUDs, to increase our points and to do the right thing, because those with lived experiences currently experiencing homelessness often are closest to having the best solutions to overcoming the challenges. So Anthony is going to be leading, kind of pulling together a work group to start meeting on a regular basis. And we want to make sure that this work group isn't working in isolation. We need to make sure that this work group has meaningful impact and is tied to our HSAC system. And since they're going to be working on ideas and plans for helping to meet the challenges in the homeless system, the thought was this work group would kind of report to and work with the policy and planning group. So I'm hoping folks from, if we have anybody on the call with lived experience or that would be interested in being part of this from the policy and planning group, whether you have lived experience or not, because this will be a lived experience work group, can be the liaison to this group. Otherwise, it'll be Anthony and I sort of bringing stuff back, and we'll obviously invite the work group once it gets up and running to these meetings to provide their feedback as well. And we've kind of started off, I'm going to hand it to Anthony here in a second, but on a high level, started off with trying to create this work group with people who are currently employed in the homeless system with lived experience, and hoping that we can start with that group of folks because they're kind of have lived experience and they have time possibly in their schedule to be part of these on a meeting schedule, and they'll help us do some outreach to bring in people who are recently housed from homeless and those who are unsheltered. So Anthony, let me hand it over to you so you can kind of walk through some of the details and where you see this heading.
Thank you, Colin. And I apologize to those of you I've met for about 4 times already in different meetings. I know you keep hearing about me, so I am here. And to all of you I haven't met, I'm grateful to meet you and to work with you. You know, everything Colin said is exactly, you know, what we want to fulfill. So HUD is very intentional about the involvement and contribution of those with lived experiences, and in many areas such as outreach and in policy development and in decision making. So we are fortunate to have representation of folks with lived experience throughout our lead agency and our member organizations, but we really want to create a way to track the impact of that involvement in the COC. And so we want to satisfy this by creating what we call the LEAD work group, LEAD, and LEAD would stand for Lived Experience Advisors. So Lived Experience Advisors work group. And there are really 3 or 4 things that this work group will have, sort of as it's called, right? It will center the staff of member organizations with lived experience at the heart of our activity, the COC's activity, to ensure ongoing feedback loop from this community. As Colin mentioned, we will include feedback as well from individuals who have been housed for less than 2 years, as well as the currently unsheltered. You know, these folks will participate in and even host listening sessions, perhaps quarterly or as often as we determine, to embed this feedback loop throughout the life cycle from entry to exit, and to have a continuous flow of information. And then we'll have this group, the lead work group, advise and report to this subcommittee of HSAC on a regular basis, just to make sure that we have ongoing collaboration and feedback. So, you know, that's kind of the bulk of it in a nutshell. How we kind of see it rolling out is that we'll start with the staff of organizations, and those folks would become sort of the central figures in an ongoing way as long as they're employed by the member organizations. And then they will kind of lead the sessions with the recently housed and with the unsheltered to keep that feedback coming back through the staff of the organizations. So that's where I am right now. Colin, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, or if we need anything formal of this committee for that work.
I don't have anything else to add. I think we kind of wanted to hear from the group if there are things that as a group you would want us to think about as we're pulling this group together, or things to keep in mind. One of the things that we are aware of, and as I talked to Sharita, since Sharita's not here today, making sure that we get a really diverse group of voices. So we're not hearing only from the people who have successfully exited homelessness, but we're also hearing from the voices who are constantly cycling in and out of the homeless system, because those are some of the voices that I think get lost a lot. And some of the reason they're getting lost is they're hard to get on a regular basis or hard to connect to. So that's going to be a challenge for us to solve, is how do we hear those voices? Want to hear your thoughts. If there's thoughts, concerns, do you like the idea? Is the group comfortable with moving forward with this as kind of a subcommittee of the Policy and Planning Committee, for lack of a better term?
I think this is a great idea. I know that we at Families Moving Forward, we have people with lived experience that are on our staff, on our board, and certainly we've seen a lot of people that have come back through our shelter that we talk with a lot to help inform the decisions that we make. And we always learn something new. And you know, we may think that we're on the right track, and then they will completely let us know that we're not, and it makes us stop and reevaluate. So I think this is a great idea. So I think that this makes the perfect sense that this is the committee that it would be liaisoning with, because I think policy and planning is certainly one that would be implementing their ideas and taking those to heart as we're thinking through planning, services in this community and creating policies that go to the HSAC for the future. So I think it's a great idea.
I agree. When I saw the agenda item, I thought Sharita is going to be so happy.
She and I
I'm
spoke.
sure, because I know she is constantly advocating for including people with lived experience on everything that we do. So this is great. This is wonderful, because obviously, as Tammy just said, there are perspectives that I don't have,
Mhm.
and I can't. There are things that I don't see. I miss because I don't know. So yeah, absolutely.
When I told Sharita about this, she said, Colin, I've been telling you that since you started. And I said, I'm not arguing you haven't, Sharita. You are right. And you have always been right on this. And we now have some extra capacity on the team that we can actually make this a reality now. And it took some time, and I'm sorry it took so long, but you are absolutely correct. It needs to be done, and it is long overdue.
And my point on this, I think it's great, and I'm so glad you guys are doing this. And I agree with the diversity, with just even just having like veterans, also just to make sure we have the whole group of living experiences.
And people fleeing DV, and
Yes.
representation from the LGBTQ plus and the youth. So it's a wide group that it's exciting, a little intimidating at the same time, I think, but hopefully it'll lead to some really cool stuff and some potentially model programs that we can figure out how to design. Other thoughts? All right. Well, we will continue to work on this and keep you all updated and bring it in. And it looks like Angela is volunteering to, am I correct on reading this, Angela? You're volunteering to help us with this endeavor?
I'm gonna take the thumbs up as a resounding yes.
I think so. Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Appreciate it. And yeah, Anthony, we'll be in touch with you to sort of figure out that. And maybe Ms. Holmes can be our liaison from the committee, the work group, to this group. Seems to be a good fit if she's able and up to doing that. Otherwise, we can always, figure it out. All right, I see a thumbs up on that too. So I think she's agreeing to do that. All right. If there's nothing else, does anybody have anything that they want to share, discuss before we wrap up? Nobody has anything else pressing today. We can go ahead and adjourn. I want to make sure people have, if there's any news to share. Otherwise, you get 3.5 minutes back in your life. All right. Thank you all very much for today. Appreciate it. And we will see you next month. Have a great day.
Yeah, everyone.
Bye.
Bye all.
Bye.